Good morning. So as Ashish said, I'm Ken Fulmer. I'm the CEO and president of IIBA. And we're going to talk to you about the strategy initiative that IIBA has undertaken. He mentioned that there's a way to download a soft copy, but this is what the hard copy looks like. It's about 100 pages of rich case study information and all that. So we're going to talk a little bit, give you a bit of an overview of what that looks like. So we're to go from when strategy is determined, how to get it executed. That continues to be a problem. And we're going to talk a little bit more with Michael introducing the concepts of what that problem really looks like, but that's the defined space of how we improve getting from strategy to execution. Okay. A forward is here? Yeah, got it, sorry. All right, so the outline of today, we're going to talk a little bit about where the profession is going, and then we're going to talk about strategic business analysis, where that fits, and move on to talking about the gap and then the solution to the gap. So when I think about where the profession is going, we have been in existence now, IIBA, for 15 years. This is our 15th year anniversary. And we have really built on and represented the best practices for business analysis. And that's represented in the BA BOK and in the extensions that we have developed around the BA BOK. Number of things that we think are part of how we're going to drive forward. And we're doing it through engaging with the corporate and thought leaders around the world so that it's not just our opinion, but it represents the thinking of the community. And we're doing that and releasing through the thought leadership program to garner feedback. So we gather feedback from corporates and experts. We release it to the community to gather feedback and expose it out to you. A number of the things that were, the focus of this year's initiative has been digital. So digital will eventually make itself into a very robust body of knowledge in itself, adapting from the current business analysis body of knowledge. So that's part of the game plan, that digital is a clear scope of what we intend to move forward with. The other that we're going to move forward with that you'll hear about today is the strategic business analysis part. And with that, we're going to be introducing other topics. Later this year, we'll be introducing cybersecurity for the business analysts. We just released the Agile extension, which we did with a partnership with the Agile Alliance in North America. And we're working towards data analytics now to be embedding a body of knowledge of the role of the business analysts in the data analytics space. So all of this says that with strategic analysis, we want to bring a new emphasis to the focus on business outcomes. So that's part of what we say we are. That's our primary core purpose, is to get better business outcomes. We need to focus on that objective and figure out how we do that, right? So we'll talk more about some specifics of it, but it's around an emphasis on how analysis fits into the strategy plays, how it helps support and develop that, and how it leads to a business-led delivery of change. If you look in the BA BOK, it speaks to the notion of business analysis is about bringing about change. And so we play on that with this material that you'll be hearing today. So without further hesitation, let me talk and introduce Michael Augello, who is coming to you live from Australia. Michael, are you still out in the outback of Australia, or have you moved into the civilized part?
Ken, still travelling in outback Queensland at the moment. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. And thank you, Ken. Excited to join you all today. Shall I continue? Are you hearing me loud and clear, Ken? Okay, firstly, I'd like to start by giving you a little on my background. Just mute myself here. Firstly, a little on my background. Like many in the audience who are listening today, I started my career as an application developer, moving into solution design, systems analysts, and information architecture. That was just a few of my roles, just some of my roles. Later, I progressed to management consulting and advisory work. Despite my various roles and titles, I've always been drawn to what we now call business analysis. Interestingly, I found I've had most fun and my best results when I've been embedded in the business and part of the business. My interests and passion led me to IIBA, and I've served as a volunteer as a for over 10 years. And I've been an international board director for 8 years. And from 2014 into 2016, I served as chair of the board. Now, Ken, I think it's important we pause and confirm why are we here today? And what is the problem we're trying to solve? We think it's there's continuing evidence around the world of a gap where many organisations cannot successfully implement strategy. And in fact, we have respected organisations such as Harvard Business Review and McKinsey Consulting report the staggering numbers of 70-75% failure rates of large-scale change programs. And the problem I think we all face, quite advantages, and I dare say significant advantages in technology in our use of methodology. Transformations and programs continue to fail at an alarming rate. And my own observation here in
lands of Australia. He's normally in Melbourne, but he's on holiday when he was joining us, so he's out on the edges of the outback. So let me pick up his part. What we're describing is, and Michael put together some clippings of project failures, major investments by companies in initiatives, in programs, and projects that have failed time after time after time. And it got us wondering, how can we remedy those kinds of failures? What does it take and why did they fail? So I think we know that much of it is around the execution part. They were well-conceived ideas, but maybe the requirements weren't clearly stated. Maybe the change process wasn't well managed. Maybe the transformation effort scope wasn't well managed. Maybe it's a governance problem. There are a number of points of failure in these large investments, but the economic loss of not managing them well is significant. We also say that we want to look at this as an opportunity to remedy this through strategic business analysis. That's why we've created this piece of work, is to bridge that gap. So that's the model of someone jumping across the gap and the rocks there is trying to describe how we can make that improvement, what it's going to take to do that we need to push out in the market, especially with the context of how it relates to business analysis to make it right. So let's try and move forward with the notion of Cecily. Macdougall is also out.
I can, Ken. Can you hear me? Fantastic. Can you see? Okay, so Thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'm Cecily Macdougall, and I'm specialised in strategic and transformation over the last 7 years. I have proven in many programs that the strategy to execution framework elements are essential to business-led delivery. And the core skill that I have found that is fundamental to this framework is strategic. Okay, so if we have a look at the framework, we have found a gap in factors. In the business life cycle, there's a gap between strategy and execution. That transfers down into the program life cycle, and strategic business analysis fills that gap as well.
I'll come back to you to fill in the gaps that I may have missed as I go through this, but from the diagram that's on the screen, you'll see that we broke this down into 3 parts of how do we assist with strategy and strategy analysis and push that forward, looking at primarily at business strategy and how it decomposes into different strategic initiatives, and then applying strategic business analysis to drive out a transformation agenda. And then the third block of it talks about how business analysis and this program management applies to digital transformations, but it also applies to services transformations and capability transformations. So it's about bringing about business-led change is the theme that persists. We look at how we do this by going through a life cycle of going from the strategic initiatives through strategic business analysis, through to the business case development, procurement, implementation, and adoption in a way that enables the fundamental, again, is that it espouses business leadership to be actively engaged in it. So we talk about that when we talk about Agile. We're saying at the programmatic level, it takes the same kind of thing. It takes deep business involvement, deep business understanding, excellent business analysis, but more with a strategic hat on of how to move through the program life cycle to fill the gaps. So a little animation in the slide there. And let me jump ahead to the next slide. So here's the specifics of the roadmap that is prescribed in this, and it's a framework. It's not overly prescriptive. And it starts with the notion of the program strategy. How do we visualize the context that the organization sees, what ecosystem is a part in? How does it conceptualize the future of the business concept that's there? And then item 2, yep, that was the program strategy. Item 2 is about sponsorship and governance. So in this, we take a look at, right from the beginning, making sure that we're set up for success by having the right engagement with the business, making sure that the sponsorship is appropriate for the context that we're going to deliver the program around. And looking at how that plays out. And when you see the context of this, there are examples, there are different case studies alluded to, and that'll help you understand what we're driving at into looking at how to improve the sponsorship and governance model. And they're generally treated as 2 separate topics, but again, that's a framework position that has to be adapted to the enterprise that you're looking at. In the third, we look at the classic business analysis, how to identify and come up with a stakeholder game plan. So in this, it's about what is the strategy with the stakeholders after they're identified. How do they fit into the program? How do we move forward with each of the stakeholder groups? And in digital, the primary stakeholder is the customer, right? That's part of the emphasis of it. So we develop a whole program of how to move forward with that. Then we go through planning out the execution roadmap. So this is somewhat analogous to a product roadmap. It looks at all of the components that are necessary to move through the execution component. Then we get, and once all of that is thought through, we're in a position to really bring forward the business case. And this is critically important, right? To understand what the business outcomes that we're trying to get to. So again, the business case is based on not just a single metric of ROI, not just on any one, but it's around how do we know that we're getting to the right business outcome, and then looking at all the components that need to go into that to make the business case a viable one to proceed forward with. Then I think one of the unique things that really speaks to, when we're talking about transformations, we're generally speaking about very large initiatives. I can speak from my own background, and Cecily has documented many of her own case studies that with the Australian government and with some of the corporations in Australia. But from my own experience, some of the large projects for an oil company, an energy company, we would have 40 or 50 different vendors participating in the project. So how your sourcing strategy works, how you tie all those different players, how they're managed internally but maybe executed with the partners, all of that has to be put together and the portions of it driven out into contracts and service delivery standards and the things that have to happen to make that. So we think that's in a real transformation project. This is an often overlooked or scrambled for to achieve element of it. Then we go beyond just the description of a general outcome and really get into the user journeys, the customer journeys and the user journeys to make sure, and we're using here the user journey, to look at the whole flow holistically of how it goes, and we can describe that. So it's related to our business process point of view, but raising it up a level so that it can go down into the details of process improvement. Then moving into how do we actually take it and move through what is the transition? How do we build out the roadmap and proceed with it, whether it's in an agile way or a lean way or a traditional way, whatever is the appropriate method of taking it through this process, and talking about how to transition from the strategy into the execution, and then how to plan the change and adaptation of what this product is going to look like, and bringing in the human aspect of it, of how to drive the human side of change, and not just focusing on the technological aspect of it. And again, throughout, an emphasis on making sure that that change is adapted and able to move forward. So again, I can't emphasize enough that the whole context of this looks at how to do business-led change. All right? That the business has to be engaged throughout the process and is richly supported by solid analysis and by this overlay of strategic business analysis. Some of the capabilities that we need in our toolbox to do this, we've identified several, but there are many more, and we describe them in the paper when you get a chance to look at it to talk about these. But it's about really making sense in how we communicate in business language. So this, how to communicate, how to make sense, how to listen with a sense-making point of view, how to, refine the problem statement so that it's well understood about what that business outcome is. So it's all about using language that is there, using design thinking, using influence skills, using the things that are all part of what is the business analysis profession has espoused from the beginning, and this is evolving it to the next step. So to do this, we think we need to change the way that we look at our own mindsets, right? And bring this notion of that gap has happened and it's common. That, sometimes the companies will come up with great strategies and then come up with a list of initiatives of how to do them, but we're not driving out enough of the elements of it. So some of the key elements are definitely the business and stakeholder engagement, working with the partners of the transformation, engaging with critical thinking. We want to focus on that business outcome and make sure that the transformation is really about strategic change. So that's the element that's so important there. Again, this is a little bit of a repeat to emphasize some areas, but it's about moving up to the strategic level to enable transformation change. And we need to take more leadership of that change as the business analyst profession. It needs to be driven by a deep understanding and partnership with the business and driving out an outcome-oriented approach, not just a project metric approach, but a real business outcome-focused approach and a deep partnership with the business. So in our total concept of what we're doing, and when I say we, meaning IIBA, we're looking at this strategy to execution as one of the blocks around strategy. The other components that'll be coming out over the next 6 to 9 months, we're going to introduce a practice guide, probably the best term to use for it, about how to do analysis to help create strategy. So we typically say that the business executives create the strategy itself, but they do so with good information and good analysis that flows into that. So we're going to come out with a whole new set of business analysis tools to support strategy development for executives. So that'll look at how to do competitive environment analysis, how to do market analysis, how to do merger and acquisition analysis, and provide those techniques of how to do that well, best practices, and add that into the IIBA arsenal of what senior level business analysts do. We've released this middle one here today, and then we're going to take a look at how strategy plays into business agility. So part of the notion of, if you're really going to have an organization where transformation isn't a one and done mindset, where it's part of the business agility, it's always evolving. How do you bring a strategy? You can't continue with a mindset that we develop a 3-year strategic plan and expect that to drive agility, right? So you can have that as a higher level framework, but we need to put in place mechanisms where the analysis can update strategy and inform strategy and allow executives to take a more agile approach to achieve the business agility objectives they're seeking. So that's part of what we're up to, and you'll see that evolve from us. We're going to take a look at, for you, the downloadable soft copy of this volume is available for a very limited time, partly because we're hoping, everything we do, we try and put it out for public review, right, to get comments back and all of that. We are looking forward to do that. We're making a handful of people and the attendees of this conference, so that's why it's a limited time availability for the download, to participate in that feedback. So we invite you to give us feedback from it. Look it over. We'll finalize this version in a few months, so we want to get that feedback in a timely way. We're looking for our big North American event to finalize this and then begin to introduce the first document at that time, which we will also make available for public review in that time frame. So that We appreciate the feedback that you can provide. The information is in your flyer about how to get the soft copy, and give it some thought, and we'd love to hear from you. And unlike the BA BOK, which is we follow the ISO standard for that, and we adjudicate every piece of feedback just to set the expectation. We're not going to do that, but we will read all the feedback and we'll consider it to how to move it forward. So we want community engagement and feedback from it, and it'll all go to Ashish, and he tells me he's got plenty of free time to deal with all that feedback, so that'll be there. And yeah, I'm happy to take questions at this time, and we'll try and bring Cecily and Michael back online if they think my answer isn't the best answer or has a different perspective from the work they've done on it. So, any questions? Yep. Is there a microphone to? Yeah. Ooh. All right, just shout it out and I'll repeat it. Yes.
That if you go back to the slides and all,
Yes.
the user journey was coming on the 7th point. Little back. Yeah, this one. How the user journey was coming on the 7th point, it should be on the before that, because we need user experience first.
I think it's a progressive collaboration thing. We do need the high-level user description and experience observations that feed in even to the definition. Here it's about going into more detail in the visualizations. So that was the intent.
But it should not be that around before making the business cases, we should have a user journey first, so it will be easy for us to make a business case accordingly.
I think that's one of the unique things of this, and we can talk about it. Cecily, are you able to join us for the response to that? The question is the order of why the business case is positioned where it is. Is that a fair restatement?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cecily, are you able to join back in? Can we? No, so I'll take a shot. We're talking about isn't a one and done. Again, it's a progressive elaboration concept. So we put it here to make sure all the necessary facts are on the table to put the business case together. So that's why it's there. But in no way does it say you create a business case, which is in common practice today, right? The business case is a one-time document and you're done with it. The business case in this model is very evolutionary. We learn as we go, and the business case, you have a base case that supports the funding that was initially asked for, but then the business case evolves over the time. So that, again, it's a progressive elaboration mindset around the business case.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes, over here. I think, yeah, there's a speaker right there if that one works. Microphone, rather.
In the BA BOK, we already have a knowledge area on strategy analysis.
Yes.
Right? So are these going to be linked to each other, or this is strategic business analysis is going to be totally separate from the strategy analysis that we have? Because in strategy analysis as well, we talk about looking at the current state where we want to be, looking at the risks, right?
Absolutely. So, and thank you for that question. It's a great question about the part of strategy analysis is described now in the BA BOK versus this. So in the BA BOK, the strategy analysis part is in the context of an initiative or a project, looking at that context element of it to make sure that there's alignment within an initiative. So you're down at the project level, at an initiative level, looking at strategy for making sure that the scope of the project is aligned with that strategy. That's the analysis of it. And that's a good thing, right? You want to see where your initiative is in the full context of everything else going on in the enterprise to do that. So that is highly relevant, but I'll call it a project view up to see context, all right? And what we're talking about here is an enterprise view from the top, how to analyze the entire enterprise and help us create strategy and then drive out the initiatives and the projects downward, right? So it's to say an enterprise level perspective rather than a initiative or project level perspective. So that's the difference, and I think we reinforce what's in the BA BOK. There's one of the white papers for the digital part deals with that very issues. Then that should be out in the next week or so. So that deals with that specific question in detail. One more question there? Yeah.
For your business strategy to succeed, don't you think you should know what is the product or service that you are offering, as well as the market segment, and why you are targeting that particular market segment?
Yes.
And then after that, your business model.
Yes.
Right.
I totally agree. So the question is about that's related to the first part, all right, about how to develop strategy that considers the marketplace, the product strategy, understands the customer and how it fits in that context of the environment, right, in the ecosystem. So that's very much covered. It's not specifically in what we talk about here, the 9 cycles of the execution model. That's more in strategy analysis that, again, we'll have that out later this year.
Okay. And the second question is, from where do you get that information that your segment is the exact segment? Because reading the segment is very, very important. Many times we tend to we don't try to read the segment properly. Or alternatively, we don't place a product also properly. In such a situation, whatever executions you may take, it will fail. The third thing is that you said about, you talked about the human element. That needs to be monitored throughout. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I think it says, is the strategy itself correct?
Right.
And if you have a bad strategy and you're executing to a bad strategy, it's going to fail.
Yeah,
right? That's the essence of the point you're making, I think. Is that what you...
Well, not exactly, because when you're trying to, let's say, sell a product, there are there are basically 2 things. One is the push factor and another is the pull factor.
Yes.
When you're talking about the push factor, which is taking place right now about the digital transformation, we have to understand whether there is an invisible need within the market.
Yes.
When you go back in history and you see Microsoft, which came up with Windows, they understood that there was an invisible need in the market, which is why Office took off very well. The same thing with Apple. And then after that, the strategy followed. Similarly, before we get into this digital aspect or whatever is the thing, what exactly is the need? How do you identify the need?
Yeah,
you have to go to the root
absolutely.
cause.
So, that, again, I think that's about the inputs into the strategy development process. And you're absolutely right. That is a tricky business, right, about how to get that right. And it's the synthesis of a number of inputs, right? It's around understanding your existing customers. What are people really looking for? What is the direction that you're trying to achieve with this? What's the innovation component, right, that is looked for in the market to be a disruptor, right? So it's around, and we see it around, with innovation labs and number of things that are being tried out there around how to gather those inputs to ascertain what that need to really understand that need, and when it's a disruptor need. And I'd be the first to admit, and I use the example all the time, if we apply techniques of business analysis to a taxi cab company the way it stands, and we don't bring in design thinking and innovation thinking, we're going to end up with a highly efficient taxi cab company, but we're not ending up with Uber. All right? So you have to bring in the whole concept of design thinking, market understanding, and innovation thinking to really make that happen, and that's the drivers of the good strategy. What I was describing here today, and I fully acknowledge the problem you're describing is a critical one, and needs strong analysis support to get to that right answer. It doesn't guarantee it, but you need good inputs to get a good understanding, right?
The best way to get into it is to really go into the market and keep reading it,
Oh,
because
absolutely.
the market keeps on changing too. That's why that strategy also fails, because we need to understand where the change is taking place and also plan accordingly.
Absolutely. So I think 2 points you're making that I totally agree with. One, when you look at our latest thinking about what are key strategies especially around digital disruption, the notion of continuous collaboration is a big part of it, and that includes reading it out. So that kind of a sneak preview here is the mindset of a product manager that needs to describe that roadmap and how to continuously interact with the market to understand what the capabilities of the product sets need to be and define road mapping strategies to do that. We're keenly aware of that, and there'll be more about how to do product road mapping and product management. I don't want to pre-release anything here because I don't know the time frame, but that is in our near-term future product plans.
And of course, if we have deep pockets, it will obviously succeed.
Well, you know what? It's the methodology, for the execution of that, it takes investment funding, right, to do that. For us to describe the framework, we learn from the market ourselves, right? And we gather that information and try and push it back as what we see companies successful at. So the technique that's described here is based on a similar thing. We didn't just sit in a room and make it up. This is, and when you see the document, you'll see case study after case study of successful implementation of this technique in transformation initiatives. So it's based on our experience and practice of Cecily and Michael and the people we work with to put this together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes, one more.
Excuse me. This is Vishal here from HSBC, Ken. Thanks for the wonderful view that you've given us right now. A quick question on the space that you've spoken about so far, the bridging between strategy and execution. One can argue that historically, this has been performed by the management consulting community and to some extent by the business architecture community, talking about the enterprise view. So how do you see BAs stepping into that particular space? Because we already have certain roles performing that.
And it's a great question, and it kind of summarizes as to others are looking at that same space, other professions and all of that. And from the beginning, we're all about collaboration, and we recognize that this isn't just a space that IIBA carves out for itself and says it's only business analysts that do this, and it's not that all business analysts do this, right? So if we look at the pyramid of business analysts and say, gosh, the vast majority of people working down at a project level and requirements management level, and then there's some that are more at the initiative level and a customer engagement level, and then there's some portion of them that work hand in hand with architects and with others to create this. And there are other frameworks of business transformation out there that are available. We wanted to say, we think there's enough uniqueness in the approach we're taking and enough to see that it's been successfully executed in a number of very, very large implementations, that this is a way, but it's still a framework, right? It's not I don't want to represent this as overly prescriptive. It has to be adapted with the expertise of the enterprise and with the inclusion, not the exclusion. It's not like business analysts are taking over the world here. It's like we need to collaborate to create this focus on the business outcome. I think that the collaboration and focus on the business aspect of the business outcome is the unique perspective that we've brought to it. And then invite in business architects, enterprise architects, all of the groups that you mentioned into that to make sure that we all focus on the business outcome thing. So again, another thing that we'll be doing is trying to improve for the community the way of using metrics. I mean, if there's one thing we hear from companies about is what are the metrics we should be using to measure outcome success. So we're trying to, get input from major companies. Love to hear back from all of the major companies in here about the kind of metrics you use and help us formulate, examples of best practice. And there is no one, right? There is no one best practice. It's what's the right practice to apply in a context. So when we describe things, we always say, what is the context in which it operates and who are the participants that need to get engaged with it? So thank you for the question.
Cecily, you go first.
Okay. Ken, thank you very much, and I'm so sorry our speakers have let us down. Technology is great when it works. When it doesn't, it's always at really important points. So thank you very much for leading us through today, and we'll have to do some work on the microphones for next time.
Ken, the questions that you received were the authors, as authors, Cecily and I have both considered most of those questions, and they're all very, very relevant. And the question around the role and who should be performing the role, absolutely. It's in the space and the realm of management consultants historically. We're not saying that we want to replace management consultants with business analysts. It's we're talking about a framework that consultants can follow as well. And absolutely, when it comes to strategy, we're not trying to create strategy, we're trying to implement existing strategy. And as that question or that comment was made, we absolutely agree with that, disruption and technology can actually influence strategy. The challenge we're seeing is how to implement that strategy. So we don't disagree with the questions, and it's just frustrating that we weren't able to respond in real time more appropriately.